It was almost midnight when the office finally began to empty. Most of the staff had already left after the long company dinner, their laughter fading into the cool night air. Only one man remained behind, cleaning the tables and helping the hotel staff clear the mess. He wasn't supposed to be doing it, but he couldn't stand leaving a place untidy. That was just who he was. Quiet, dependable, someone who believed that small actions mattered. He had been working for the company for 3 years now. As a single father, he took the job not because it paid well, but because it gave him steady hours and a little stability for his young daughter waiting at home. He was both mother and father to her, and everything he did, every extra shift, every long drive, was for her future. That night had been exhausting. The company had just celebrated a big deal, and everyone was in high spirits. The CEO herself was there, a woman known for her sharp eyes, expensive suits, and a reputation for being cold. People respected her, but they also feared her. She didn't smile much, never wasted words, and made decisions that could change someone's career in seconds. He respected her too, though not because of her power. He respected how hard she worked. He'd often seen her stay late in the office, lights on, when everyone else had gone home. It reminded him of himself, someone trying to hold everything together, just in a different world. As he packed up the last few bottles, the restaurant manager came over and said quietly, "Your boss is still inside. I think she's had too much to drink." He turned his head and saw her sitting alone at a corner table. The others who had been cheering around her earlier had all left. Her usually straight posture was gone. She was leaning back, one hand loosely holding a glass, staring at nothing. He hesitated for a moment. She was his boss. Helping her might be seen as overstepping, but leaving her like that didn't feel right either. He walked over slowly and spoke softly. "Ma'am, it's getting late. Should I call someone to pick you up?" She lifted her head, her eyes slightly unfocused. "Everyone left?" she asked, her voice quieter than usual. "Yes," he said gently. "I can drop you home if you'd like. It's not safe to stay here this late." For a second she looked at him as if trying to decide whether to trust him. Then she gave a small nod, almost childlike. "All right. But don't tell anyone." He gave a small smile. "Of course not." Outside, the air was cold, and she shivered slightly as they walked to the car. He opened the door for her, and she sank into the seat, silent and tired. The city lights reflected faintly on her face as he started the engine. She looked out the window without speaking for a while. Halfway through the drive, she said softly, "Do you ever get tired of being responsible all the time?" He wasn't sure how to respond. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But I don't really have a choice." She gave a weak laugh. "Neither do I." The road was quiet, and the only sound was the hum of the engine. He noticed her breathing slow, her head resting slightly against the window. She wasn't fully asleep, just lost in thought. He wondered what her life was like beyond the office. Did she have someone waiting for her? Did she ever feel lonely in that big world she controlled? When they reached her building, he parked and went around to open her door. She tried to get out, but her balance failed her, and she stumbled slightly. He caught her arm quickly, steadying her. She looked embarrassed. "I'm fine," she said quietly. "I know," he replied kindly. "Just take it slow." He helped her to the elevator, keeping a respectful distance. Inside, the silence was thick but not uncomfortable. When they reached her floor, she fumbled for her keys but dropped them. He picked them up gently and handed them back. Her apartment was elegant but strangely empty, like a place meant more for work than rest. She set her bag on the table and sighed, running a hand through her hair. "You can leave now," she murmured. He nodded. "I just wanted to make sure you got home safe." As he turned to go, she said suddenly, "Why are you always so calm? Everyone else rushes, complains, gets angry. You don't." He paused by the door. "Maybe because I've learned anger doesn't solve much," he said softly, "and I have someone depending on me. My daughter. She needs me to stay steady." She looked at him, her expression softer than he'd ever seen. "You're a single father?" "Yes," he said with a small nod. "She's 8. Something unreadable flickered in her eyes, maybe surprise, maybe something else. She nodded slowly. "That must be hard." "It has its moments," he replied, smiling faintly. "But she makes it worth it." He said goodnight and left quietly, closing the door behind him. As he walked down the hallway, he thought about how strange life could be. How two people from such different worlds could cross paths like that. To him, it was just another act of kindness. He didn't think it meant anything more. When he reached home, his daughter was already asleep on the couch, the TV still glowing faintly. He smiled, turned it off, and covered her with a blanket. Then he sat beside her, feeling the usual mix of exhaustion and quiet pride. The next morning, he got up early, made breakfast, and dropped his daughter at school before heading to work. He didn't expect anything to be different. For him, life was a routine, steady, predictable, safe. But when he arrived at the office, the atmosphere felt slightly strange. People were whispering near the elevators. He didn't pay much attention and went straight to his desk. An hour later, his phone buzzed. It was an internal call from the CEO's office. The assistant's voice came through, polite but formal. "The boss wants to see you." His heart skipped a beat. He tried to think if he had done anything wrong. Maybe someone had seen him with her last night. Maybe they thought he crossed a line. He straightened his shirt, took a deep breath, and walked to her office. When he knocked, her voice came from inside, calm and steady. "Come in." She was standing by the window, the morning light falling across her face. She looked completely different from last night. Composed. Professional. Every trace of vulnerability gone. He stood silently, waiting. She turned to him and said, "You took me home last night." "Yes," he replied carefully. "You weren't feeling well and I didn't want you to be unsafe." She nodded slowly. "Did anyone see you?" "No, ma'am." "Good," she said after a moment. Then she sighed, almost as if talking to herself. "I don't usually lose control like that. Thank you for making sure I got home safely." "You don't have to thank me," he said quietly. "Anyone would have done the same." She looked at him for a moment longer, studying him as if seeing him properly for the first time. "Not everyone would," she said finally. He didn't know what to say to that. After a long pause, she spoke again, softer this time. "Do you always take care of people like that?" He hesitated. "I guess I just try to do what's right." Something in her eyes shifted, a faint memory perhaps. She looked away for a moment, then said, "You remind me of someone I used to know." He didn't ask who. It didn't feel right to. She dismissed him soon after, saying she had meetings to attend. He nodded respectfully and left, though his mind stayed on her words. That day at work felt different. She wasn't as distant as before. She didn't smile exactly, but when she passed by him in the hallway, she gave a small nod. The kind of acknowledgement that meant more than words. That night, when he picked up his daughter from school, she told him about her day, her voice full of excitement over a drawing contest. He listened, smiling as he always did, but somewhere in his thoughts, the image of his boss sitting quietly in her apartment lingered. He couldn't explain why. Maybe it was because he had seen a side of her no one else had. Not the strict CEO, not the confident leader, but a human being, tired and fragile beneath the surface. For her, the night might have been embarrassing, something she'd rather forget. For him, it was just a reminder that even the strongest people sometimes need help. And yet he couldn't have known then how much that single night would change everything that followed. The words she would say later, the decisions she would make, none of that was in his mind. All he knew was that he had done the right thing. He had helped someone get home safely. That was enough for him. But life, as it often does, had other plans. The next morning started quietly, just like any other day. The sky outside was still gray when he woke up. His daughter was still asleep, curled up on the couch with her small toy beside her. He smiled softly, brushed her hair from her face, and went to make breakfast. The smell of fried eggs and tea filled the small apartment. It wasn't fancy, but it was home. He had made a life out of little things. Mornings like this, laughter over simple meals, stories before bed. That's what kept him going. He dropped his daughter off at school, like always. She hugged him tightly before running off, her school bag bouncing behind her. He stood there for a few seconds, watching her go. Then he got on his old motorcycle and headed to work. The office was already buzzing when he arrived. Phones ringing, keyboards clicking, voices echoing down the hall. It felt like any normal morning, except for the strange tension he felt in his chest. He kept thinking about the night before, about the way his boss had looked at him when she said those strange words. He tried to shake it off. People like her had complicated lives. She probably didn't even remember half of what she said. He told himself it was better that way. Better to stay invisible. Just do his job quietly. But by mid-morning, something happened that made him pause. His work phone rang, and when he answered, the voice on the other end was her assistant. "The boss would like to see you," she said, polite but firm. He froze for a second. "Right now?" "Yes," she said as soon as possible. His hands felt a little cold as he put the phone down. He wasn't sure if he had done something wrong or if this was about last night. Maybe she was upset he had taken her home. Maybe she thought he had overstepped. He took a deep breath, fixed his collar, and knocked on her door a few minutes later. "Come in," came her voice. Calm, controlled, the same as always. When he stepped inside, she was sitting behind her desk looking at some papers. The morning light came through the big window, catching the edge of her hair. She didn't look up right away, which made him even more nervous. After a few moments, she set the papers down and finally looked at him. Her expression wasn't cold like usual, it was unreadable. "You can relax," she said quietly. "You're not in trouble." He nodded, though his heart was still racing. "I just wanted to make sure everything was all right." She leaned back in her chair. "You helped me last night," she said softly. "I don't remember everything, but I remember enough." "Yes," he said. "You weren't feeling well, so I made sure you got home safely." There was a long pause. She looked at him as if searching for something in his face. "Why did you do that?" He blinked. "Because it was the right thing to do." Her eyes softened a little. "You didn't have to. Most people would have left me there or called someone else." He smiled slightly. "Maybe, but I don't like leaving anyone alone when they need help." She looked down for a moment, then back at him. "Do you always live like that? Doing things for others even when no one notices?" He thought about it. "I guess so. My daughter depends on me, and I want her to see kindness even in small things. Life's already hard enough. Maybe being decent is the only thing I can control." The room was quiet after that. For a long time, she said nothing. Then, almost in a whisper, she said, "You remind me of someone I used to know." He didn't ask who. He just nodded slightly, unsure what to say. Finally, she stood up and walked toward the window. "I was raised to believe kindness was weakness," she said, her voice low. "That if you showed emotion, people would take advantage of you. I built this company thinking strength meant never needing anyone. But lately, I'm starting to wonder if that's true." He didn't know what she wanted him to say. He wasn't someone who gave advice to CEOs. He was just a man who worked hard to get by. But he could see something in her eyes, a kind of tiredness that went deeper than lack of sleep. She turned back to him. "You can go now," she said softly. "Thank you for coming." He nodded, gave a polite smile, and left the room quietly. The rest of the day passed slowly. She didn't speak to him again, but once when he walked past her office, he saw her staring out the window, lost in thought. Something about her looked different. The walls she usually kept up seemed a little lower. That night he picked up his daughter from school again. They stopped for ice cream on the way home, and she laughed when a drop melted onto her nose. He wiped it away and smiled. But as he sat at the small kitchen table later, going through bills, he couldn't stop thinking about his boss's words. "You remind me of someone I used to know." What did she mean by that? And why did it sound like it came from a place of pain? The next few days were quiet, but something subtle had changed. She wasn't the same with him. She started greeting him in the mornings, something she'd never done before. Once she even asked about his daughter, how old she was, what she liked doing. He answered carefully, unsure where the conversation was going. But her questions didn't feel forced. She seemed genuinely curious, as if trying to understand a life very different from her own. Then one afternoon he was cleaning the back seat of her car when she came down earlier than usual. She stood there watching him for a moment, then said, "You pick up your daughter from school every day?" "Yes," he said. "She waits for me at the gate. I never want her to feel like she's waiting too long." She nodded slowly. "I used to wait for someone too," she said quietly. "But they stopped showing up." He didn't know what to say to that, so he just gave a small understanding nod. Sometimes silence was kinder than words. Later that week it rained heavily. The city was almost flooded and most employees left early. He stayed behind because she was still in her office working. When he went upstairs to let her know the roads were getting bad, she was sitting at her desk, staring blankly at her computer screen. "Ma'am," he said gently, "the rain's getting worse. Maybe you should head home before it floods." She looked up, startled, as if pulled out of another world. "Oh, I didn't realize," he smiled slightly. "You've been working for hours." She sighed and rubbed her temples. "Work is easier than thinking." He didn't answer, but she caught the look in his eyes, one that understood more than he said. They walked out together, and this time she didn't walk ahead of him like she usually did. She walked beside him. When they reached the lobby, she paused and said, "I used to think people like you and I had nothing in common, but maybe I was wrong." He looked at her, surprised. "We're all just people," he said simply. "Some of us just wear different uniforms." She gave a faint smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes but still felt real. "You really believe that, don't you?" "Yes," he said quietly. "I think the world would be easier if more people did." For a moment, they just stood there, the sound of rain echoing through the entrance. Then she said softly, "Drive safely. I'll see you tomorrow." That night after he got home, his daughter ran up to him with a school drawing, a family of two holding hands under a big sun. He smiled, hugging her tightly. Life wasn't easy, but these moments made it feel worth every struggle. Meanwhile, somewhere across the city, the CEO sat in her quiet apartment, staring at a picture frame she hadn't touched in years. It showed her and a man beside a car, both smiling brightly. The photo had dust on it now. She wiped it gently, her fingers trembling slightly. In her mind, she kept hearing his words. "I just try to do what's right." She didn't know why that sentence bothered her so much. Or maybe she did. It reminded her of the person she used to be, before success changed everything, before walls replaced warmth. The next morning, she called a meeting early. The whole team gathered, surprised by the sudden notice. She stood in front of them, calm as ever, but her tone was slightly different, softer somehow. "I want to thank everyone for your work these past few weeks," she began. "But I also want to remind you that kindness is not weakness. It's the foundation of good work." People exchanged confused looks. She wasn't known for giving speeches like that. When the meeting ended, she caught his eye across the room. Just for a second, no words. Just a look that said she hadn't forgotten what he'd done for her that night. He didn't expect anything from her. He didn't want praise or attention. But something inside him felt warm, knowing he had somehow made a small difference in someone's life. Someone who, despite all her power, might have needed kindness more than anyone else. He left the office that day without realizing that their story was only just beginning, because in the days to come, her guarded world would start to open, and his quiet kindness would lead to changes neither of them could have imagined. And it all started with one simple night, and one simple act in helping someone get home safely. The days that followed were quiet, but they carried a weight neither of them had expected. At first, nothing seemed to have changed. He still arrived at the office early, still greeted her politely, and still performed his duties without drawing attention. She still sat at her desk, eyes sharp, words precise, and decisions firm. But there was something subtle in the way she looked at him now. A small recognition, a curiosity that hadn't been there before. It started with little things. A question about his daughter's schoolwork. A brief conversation in the hallway about traffic or weather. She would ask, and he would answer simply, honestly, with no expectation of reward or attention. And gradually she began to linger. Not openly, not with anyone else watching, but in moments when the office seemed empty. She would come into the small break room just as he was washing a cup or straightening the chairs. At first, he wasn't sure if he should respond. She was the CEO, someone he had always treated with respect and distance. But there was a softness in her voice, a real interest in her questions that made it feel different. It wasn't a test. It wasn't a command. She was simply curious. One afternoon, as he was finishing up cleaning the meeting room after a long session, she came in quietly. Her steps were soft against the carpet, and she didn't speak immediately. He looked up and saw her leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, eyes thoughtful. "You're patient," she said, almost to herself. He shrugged. "I don't really have a choice most of the time," he said. "My daughter depends on me." "Patience is part of the job," she smiled faintly. "You must be tired sometimes." "Of course," he admitted. "But she makes it worth it." She studied him for a long moment, then asked, "Do you ever feel alone?" Her question caught him off guard. He had never shared much about his life, not even with coworkers who had become friendly over time. But there was something in her tone that felt honest, not prying, and he nodded slowly. Sometimes, he said quietly, but I try not to dwell on it. Being alone doesn't always mean being lonely. She didn't answer immediately. She simply moved to the W. Window and looked out at the city below. The afternoon light caught her hair, and for a moment she didn't look like the CEO everyone feared. She looked like someone carrying the weight of a life that had demanded far too much. Then she spoke, her voice low, almost hesitant. I've built walls around myself for so long. I thought I needed to. But lately, I'm not sure anymore. I see how you live your life, how you carry responsibility without bitterness. It's inspiring in a way I can't explain. He said nothing. There was nothing to say. Words often fell short when someone was finally opening up. She turned toward him then, and for the first time, her eyes seemed vulnerable. I've been hurt, she said softly. Years ago, someone I trusted left me when I needed them most. Since then, I buried myself in work, in control, in certainty, and I never let anyone get close. He listened quietly, just as he had learned to do in his own life. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer solutions. He simply allowed her to speak, to carry the weight of what she had been holding inside for years. It's lonely, she admitted, and I think that's why I was surprised last week. When you helped me, you didn't judge me. You didn't make me feel small or weak. You just helped, he nodded gently. Sometimes that's all people need. Someone to be there when they're struggling. She smiled faintly, almost sadly. You make it sound simple. It is simple, he said. It's the hardest things in life that are often simple. Doing the right thing, being patient, being honest. That's all. Her eyes lingered on him for a long moment. I forgot what that felt like, she admitted. I forgot what it felt like to be seen without pretense, to be treated like a person, not a position. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. His silence said what words couldn't. He understood. He had lived it. From that day on, their interactions changed, though subtly. She began asking for his opinion on small things. Not work decisions, but minor choices that reflected her curiosity about life beyond the office. Which route was less busy in the morning? Which school did he recommend for his daughter? What movies did children enjoy most? At first he felt uneasy answering. He wasn't a consultant or an advisor, but there was a sincerity in her questions, a desire to see life from another perspective. And slowly he realized she wasn't just asking because she wanted information. She was asking because she trusted him. One evening, he was leaving late after cleaning the parking lot, and she appeared at the entrance. She hesitated before speaking, almost as if she was unsure she should be there. You're leaving late again, she said softly. Yes, he replied. Traffic isn't bad yet, so I'm trying to get home before it rains. She paused, her hand brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. Do you mind if I walk with you? He froze for a second. It wasn't a question anyone in her position normally asked someone like him. He hesitated, then nodded. Not at all. As they walked through the empty streets, she said nothing for a while. The city lights reflected off the wet pavement, and the quiet was soothing. Finally, she spoke. Do you ever wish life was easier? All the time, he said simply. But wishing doesn't change much. You just have to keep going, she laughed softly. You sound like someone who's always been responsible for others. I am, he admitted. But responsibility isn't always heavy. Sometimes it's a privilege. Her laugh faded, replaced by a thoughtful silence. She glanced at him, and he saw a flicker of something he hadn't seen before. Openness, maybe even hope. Days turned into weeks. She began to confide more. Little things at first, then larger concerns. A failed investment, a difficult employee, a childhood memory that still hurt. And every time he listened. He never judged. He never interrupted. He simply gave her the space to speak. One afternoon, she invited him into her office after everyone else had left. Can I ask you something personal? She said quietly. Of course, he replied. Do you think people can really change? She asked, her eyes searching his. He thought for a moment. I do, he said finally. People can change if they want to, if they're willing to see themselves honestly and make the effort. She nodded slowly. I think. I've been afraid to change, afraid to let go of control, afraid to be hurt again, but I feel like talking to you makes it easier. I don't feel so alone. He didn't say anything, just offered a gentle nod of understanding. She smiled faintly, a genuine smile that lit her face in a way he hadn't seen in years. From that moment on, their connection grew quietly but steadily. She began to rely on him more, not just for help or guidance, but for companionship in the small human ways that life sometimes required. He noticed subtle changes in her demeanor. She no longer rushed through conversations or dismissed people instantly. She paused, listened, and sometimes even laughed. Small, brief moments, but significant. One evening, as he helped her carry some files to her car, she stopped him. "You're always helping people," she said softly. "I've been thinking. I never really thanked you properly for that night. For last week. For everything." He shook his head. "No thanks needed. I didn't do it for that." She smiled faintly, looking away. "I know, but still, it mattered to me more than I can say. You reminded me that there are people in this world who care without expecting anything in return. That's rare." He nodded, not sure how to respond. Words seemed too small to match her sincerity. As the weeks passed, the office began to notice small changes too. She was softer, less distant. She started greeting staff in the mornings, asking after their families, noticing things she had ignored before. He watched quietly from a distance, knowing that she hadn't done it for recognition. She was genuinely becoming more human, more open, and through it all he remained the same steady presence, patient, quiet, dependable. One rainy night after helping her get home from a late meeting, she paused at the doorway of her apartment. "I used to think life was only about control, about power," she said quietly. "But I think maybe it's also about trust, and I'm learning that from you." He nodded gently, letting her words sink in. "Trust is earned," he said, "and sometimes given freely. Both are important." She smiled faintly, looking at him in a way that suggested she was beginning to believe it again. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." And for the first time he realized that helping her wasn't just about one night or one act of kindness. It was about showing her that connection, trust, and empathy were still possible, even after years of disappointment. Little did he know, this trust would set the stage for challenges to come. Moments of doubt and eventually, a turning point neither of them expected. A moment where everything could change. Because once someone allows themselves to be seen, even in small ways, life begins to open doors that were long closed. The days after her quiet confession became routine. But not everyone in the office noticed the small changes. Some did. Whispered comments floated through the hallways, and curious eyes followed the interactions between the CEO and the single father who had quietly earned her trust. At first, it was subtle. People noticed her asking him questions that had nothing to do with work. "Did you see the new report?" she would ask him sometimes, only to follow up with, "And how is your daughter?" It was unusual, and coworkers began to whisper. By midweek, the whispers grew louder. One of the senior managers, clearly irritated by the attention the quiet man was receiving, muttered under his breath, "I never thought the boss would care about someone like him. It doesn't feel right." Others joined in with speculation, some curious, some judgmental. The rumors didn't reach her directly, but the tension in the office became palpable. He noticed it too. The way people glanced at him when she spoke, the subtle raising of eyebrows, the half-smiles that carried judgment. He tried not to let it bother him. Rumors had never changed his work ethic or his focus. But he did notice her becoming quieter in front of others. She seemed to pull back slightly, as if afraid that being close to him would expose her to more scrutiny. One afternoon, he found her sitting alone in her office, looking out the window at the gray sky. The light of the late afternoon cast long shadows across the room, highlighting her pensive expression. "You've been quiet today," he said softly as he entered. Not wanting to startle her, she didn't turn immediately. "I'm thinking," she said finally, "about the office, about everything." He nodded, keeping a respectful distance. "Do you want to talk about it?" She shook her head slightly. "Not really, sometimes it's easier to focus on work than deal with opinions." He understood. He had learned early in life that opinions didn't matter as much as actions. "People talk," he said gently. "But what matters is what you know to be true." She gave a faint, almost sad smile. "You always make it sound so simple." "It's not simple," he admitted. "It's just necessary. You can't control what others say, but you can control how you respond." She leaned back in her chair, studying him. "You make patience sound like strength." "I think it is," he said. "Strength isn't just about power or control. It's about staying steady when everything else is chaotic." She was quiet for a long time, letting his words sink in. Then she said softly, almost to herself, I wish I could be more like that. He didn't respond immediately. There was no need. Sometimes just listening was enough. Later that week, the office faced a sudden emergency. A shipment had been delayed, a major client was unhappy, and everyone was scrambling to fiend. Solutions. She worked late into the night, reviewing documents, making calls, and coordinating her team. He stayed behind too, not because he had to, but because he wanted to be present. The office was quiet except for the hum of computers and the occasional click of a keyboard. She was tense, moving from desk to desk, making sure nothing was overlooked. At one point, she sat heavily in her chair, rubbing her temples. He approached slowly, carrying 2 cups of tea. "You shouldn't be up this late," he said softly, placing a cup beside her. She looked up at him, startled. I need to make sure everything is correct." "I understand," he said, "but you also need to take care of yourself." She didn't answer at first, just looked at him. Then quietly she said, "It's difficult to trust anyone to get things right." "I know," he said, "but you're not alone tonight." She studied him for a moment, her eyes softening. "You've been different lately. Calm, steady. Not afraid of me, not trying to impress me." He shrugged slightly. "I don't need to impress anyone. I just do what I can." For a moment, the office felt empty except for the 2 of them. Then she spoke quieter than before. "I've been hurt before. I don't want to let anyone in, not again, but I feel safe with you." He didn't know how to respond, and he didn't need to. She had said enough. The night stretched on, and eventually the work was done. She sat back exhausted and looked at him. "Thank you," she said simply, "for being here." "You don't need to thank me," he replied quietly. "I just wanted to help." Her smile was faint but genuine. "You always make helping sound effortless." He laughed softly. "It isn't, but some things are worth the effort." The next morning, rumors were buzzing again. Some employees had noticed her staying late with him, noticed the small gestures, the quiet understanding between them. She seemed more distant than usual, as if aware that the office was watching, judging. He noticed it too. She avoided eye contact in meetings, kept her conversations brief, and moved quickly through the day. He didn't want to overstep, so he respected her distance even though it left him uneasy. That evening, after everyone else had left, she called him. "Can you come to the hospital?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, almost trembling. "Is everything all right?" he asked immediately. "My father," she said softly. He fell ill. "I'm alone, please." Without hesitation, he grabbed his jacket and headed out. The city streets were busy with evening traffic, but he drove quickly, carefully, knowing every minute mattered. When he arrived, she was pacing in the hospital waiting area, her face pale and worried. She looked up when he approached, relief flooding her features. "You came," she said simply. "I told you I would," he replied softly. "Let's see how he is." The doctor gave them a brief update, nothing critical, but he needed monitoring. She nodded, holding herself together for a moment, then slumped into a chair, exhausted. He sat beside her quietly. "He'll be fine," he said. "But you need to rest too." "I can't," she whispered. "I need to stay here." "You don't have to do it alone," he said. "I'll stay." She looked at him, a mixture of gratitude and surprise in her eyes. For the first time, she allowed herself to lean on someone completely, to trust someone with her vulnerability. They sat together in silence for hours, her fingers fidgeting with a tissue, his presence steady and reassuring. He didn't speak much, but she didn't mind. She didn't need words. She needed someone who wouldn't judge, someone who wouldn't leave. By midnight, her father's condition stabilized. She exhaled a long breath, finally allowing herself to relax. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You don't need to thank me," he said again. "I told you, you're not alone." She nodded, her eyes glistening. I forget that sometimes. I forget that people can care without expecting anything." "You'll remember now," he said softly. "You've seen it." The ride home was quiet. She didn't speak much, simply gazing out the window, lost in thought. He drove carefully, knowing she needed this time, this moment of reflection. When they arrived, he helped her inside, just like that first night. She turned to him, her expression soft and unguarded. "I don't know what I would have done without you tonight." "You wouldn't have been alone," he said simply. She smiled faintly, a small but genuine smile. "I think I trust you more than I've trusted anyone in a long time." He didn't say anything, only nodded. It was enough. The next day, the office buzzed with normal activity, but she carried herself differently. There was a calmness, a focus that hadn't been there before, and though rumors continued, she didn't let them affect her. She had learned that trust and loyalty mattered more than gossip. He went about his work quietly, helping where he could, never expecting recognition. But he noticed her glances, the small acknowledgments in hallways, the way she paused sometimes as if to consider his presence. Their bond had deepened in a way neither could have anticipated. It was no longer just about one act of kindness, one night, one crisis. It was about understanding, trust, and the quiet support that came from being there for someone without conditions. And though challenges would continue to come, whispers, office politics, and personal fears, that night at the hospital had changed something irrevocably. It had created a bridge between two lives, one built on respect, trust, and the realization that even the strongest people sometimes need someone to lean on. Little did they know, the coming weeks would test that trust even more, pushing both of them to confront feelings, choices, and moments that would determine whether their bond would remain just a quiet understanding or grow into something life-changing. Because when someone finally allows themselves to trust, life has a way of opening doors in ways they never expected. The morning started quietly, but the tension in the office was different. Something was in the air, subtle but undeniable. People whispered in hushed tones, glanced at their screens, and stole quick looks at the CEO's office. Rumors had always existed, but today it felt like everyone was waiting for something big. He arrived early, as usual, carrying his bag and heading straight to his desk. His routine never changed, and yet he could feel that today would not be like any other. The quiet, steady life he had built around small tasks and responsibilities was about to shift, though he didn't know how. The CEO had called an early company-wide meeting. It was unusual. She rarely called meetings unless there was an important announcement. Employees gathered in the main hall murmuring among themselves. Some looked curious, others cautious. Nobody expected what was about to happen. She entered the hall with her usual composed presence, but there was a softness in her eyes, a calm that had not been there before. She didn't begin with the usual corporate announcements or business updates. Instead, she paused, letting the murmurs settle. "I want to speak about something important," she began. Her voice was steady but gentle, carrying through the hall in a way that demanded attention without demanding fear. "This company has grown because of the work and dedication of every person here, but it is also sustained by the people who often go unnoticed." He listened quietly from the back, keeping his posture straight. He wasn't sure what was coming, but the tension made his chest tighten. "I want to talk about kindness," she continued. "Kindness is often overlooked in a world that values results and speed. But it is kindness that builds trust, that creates loyalty, that allows people to rise together rather than fall apart." The employees exchanged glances. This was not a speech they were used to hearing from her. There was something personal in her words, something that carried weight beyond the corporate. "And sometimes," she said, pausing and looking directly at him, "kindness comes when you least expect it, from people who expect nothing in return." He felt his heart skip a beat. His hands tightened around his bag. She continued, her voice calm but filled with emotion. "Last week, someone reminded me that even the smallest actions can have the largest impact. They didn't ask for recognition. They didn't seek reward. They simply did what was right. That person reminded me of what it means to care, to trust, and to see people for who they are, not for their position or power." She turned fully toward him, her eyes locking with his. "From today, he will have a new role in this company. A position that reflects not his title, but his integrity, his patience, and his dedication to others. He will lead our employee support and welfare division, helping ensure that every person in this company feels valued and cared for." The hall went silent. His coworkers stared, some in shock, some in disbelief. He couldn't move immediately, couldn't speak. Recognition had never been part of his life, and now it was being handed to him in the most unexpected way. She stepped down from the podium and walked toward him, her steps deliberate but calm. "You've shown me that even in a world where people expect nothing but results, it is possible to act with compassion, to act with patience, and to make a real difference. Thank you for reminding me of that." He felt the weight of the moment, the mixture of surprise, gratitude, and disbelief. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came immediately. He could only nod, his throat tight with emotion. She smiled softly. "Go ahead," she said quietly, almost encouragingly. "Say something." I don't know what to say," he admitted, his voice low but steady. I try to do what's right. That's all." "That's exactly it," she said, her eyes shining faintly. "That's why it matters. That's why you matter." For the first time in years, he felt completely seen, completely recognized. It wasn't about money or title or status. It was about the acknowledgement that his simple acts of kindness had changed someone's world, and in turn, his own life. The employees began to clap, some softly at first, then louder, as they realized the gravity of what she had done. He felt a rush of warmth but also humility. He had never imagined that helping someone get home safely could lead to this moment. After the meeting, she walked beside him quietly as people resumed their work. "How do you feel?" she asked softly. "Surprised," he said honestly, "and grateful. But mostly, I feel like I can keep doing what I've always done and it actually matters." She nodded. "It does matter. More than you know. You've reminded me that even someone in my position needs to trust, needs to be reminded that kindness is powerful." Over the next few days, his new role began to take shape. He started visiting departments, speaking to employees, understanding their challenges and helping them feel heard. It wasn't easy. There were frustrations, misunderstandings, and resistance from some who didn't understand the change. But he approached every situation as he always had, patiently, honestly, and with genuine concern. The CEO watched quietly, often from her office or in passing through the hallways. She saw how he interacted with people, how he treated every concern seriously, how he made time for small gestures that no one else noticed. And with each passing day, she felt her respect for him grow, but more than respect, she felt something deeper. One evening, after a long day, he stayed behind to help a junior employee sort through some paperwork. She appeared at the office doorway holding 2 cups of tea. "You didn't have to wait for me," he said quietly, smiling faintly. "I wanted to," she replied softly. "I think you've done enough for everyone today, but you never stopped to take care of yourself. I thought you deserved this." He took the cup, his hands brushing hers lightly. "Thank you," he said. She smiled, but this time it wasn't the faint smile she sometimes gave in public. This was a genuine, unguarded smile, one that carried warmth and appreciation. "You've changed more than this company. You've reminded me why I started all of this in the first place, and to make a difference. And sometimes we forget that, but you reminded me." He didn't know what to say. Words felt too small. Instead, he nodded, accepting both the tea and the sentiment. Over the following weeks, the office transformed. The atmosphere became lighter, more collaborative. Employees who had once felt overlooked now felt heard and supported. He implemented small initiatives, flexible hours for parents, appreciation notes for hard work, and quiet check-ins for employees struggling with stress. And she, the CEO, found herself changing too. She smiled more freely, spoke more gently, and allowed herself to trust people, sometimes even stepping back and letting them make decisions on their own. She had been reminded that vulnerability was not weakness, and that support didn't come from isolation but from connection. One morning, after a particularly difficult week, she called him into her office. He entered quietly, expecting another conversation about reports or meetings. Instead, she gestured for him to sit. "I've been thinking," she said softly, "about that night when you brought me home. I was lost in more ways than I realized, and your simple act. It reminded me that I'm not alone, that someone believes in doing the right thing without expecting anything. I needed that more than I knew." He nodded, keeping his eyes steady. "Sometimes people just need someone to be there. That's all." She studied him, then smiled faintly. "You've shown me more than that. You've reminded me of trust, patience, and honesty, and that's worth more than anything else." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The room was quiet, filled with understanding that didn't need words. "Thank you," she said again, softly but firmly, "for everything you've done and for everything you continue to do." He smiled faintly, the warmth spreading through him. "I just try to live the way I think is right," he said. "That's all anyone can do," she nodded. "And that's why it matters." Weeks later, as he walked home from the office, his daughter ran to him at the gate, hugging him tightly. He smiled, lifted her up, and held her close. The world felt a little brighter, a little safer, because he knew that small acts of kindness could ripple outward, changing lives in ways no one could predict. At home that evening, he reflected on everything that had happened. A simple choice, helping someone on a difficult night, had led to recognition, trust, and a new path for him and those around him. But more than that, it had changed the life of someone who had built walls around her heart, reminding her that connection and kindness were not weaknesses, but strengths. And for both of them, that realization was priceless, because sometimes a single act of humanity in the quiet of the night can change everything by morning.